Empire of Death. And thus we have reached the end of Doctor Who Series 14, or Season 1 if you're still calling it that. Empire of Death is the 8th and final episode, and it's written by Russell T Davies. Now, one thing I forgot to mention in my review of The Legend of Ruby Sunday is that the big villain of that story and this particular story, Sutekh, is voiced by Gabriel Wolfe. Gabriel Wolfe actually previously voiced the character of Sutekh back in 1975's Pyramids of Mars, which I did actually go back and kind of watch over again this week, just because I felt I probably should with Sutekh returning. Gabriel Wolfe voiced him there. Gabriel Wolfe also voiced the character of the Beast, or Satan, depending on how you want to look at it, in the story The Impossible Planet and the Satan Pit in 2006. And at the time of actually recording his part for Empire of Death, the man was 91 years old, and it had been something like 48 years since he had voiced the character last. And to be able to come back and to actually agree to come back to Doctor Who at 91 years old to record the part, I've got to give the man major props for that, because that's impressive. Anyway, most if nearly all of the characters from the previous episode return. However, this episode mainly focuses on 3 characters, aside from Sutekh himself. Now, Sutekh reveals that he... Actually, I'll get to that. As I said, the story mainly focuses around the 15th Doctor, played by Ncuti Gatwa, his companion, Ruby Sunday, played by Millie Gibson, and his former companion, Melanie Bush, played once again by Bonnie Langford. Because after managing to kind of embody himself, Sutekh then sends his followers, and they send out a cloud of death across planet Earth, killing practically everyone except for the followers. Now, the 3 people who are able to escape, as I said, are the Doctor, Ruby, and Mel, as thanks to the time window, they are able to cobble together a TARDIS, essentially a memory of the TARDIS, and use that to escape planet Earth. The memory of the TARDIS is actually a really cool idea. I mean, I love that it's made up of parts of various other TARDISes, such as, I think there's a classic TARDIS kind of embedded in the roof, and you can tell parts from Matt Smith's first TARDIS, the copper one from 2010, and also the coral one that was used from 2005 throughout various points. Apparently there's also a ton of other Easter eggs in there. Like, I watched the Doctor Who Unleashed directly after this episode, and they had a lot of parts to play with, including parts of the sonic screwdriver. They also had parts of K9. There's even the yellow space helmet that was used in his orange spacesuit for many years. That's stuck into the TARDIS. And if you go back and actually look at the episode, there's a ton of various bits and bobs that they fitted into this TARDIS. But the question of how Sutekh was actually able to return after being banished to the time vortex in the Pyramids of Mars, that's actually rather tragic, because it's revealed that after that first encounter, Sutekh was able to essentially attach himself to the TARDIS. He was able to kind of squirrel himself away with it, and basically the Doctor has been to so many planets across the universe that with the character of Susan Triad, or this Susan Twist character, Sutekh, wherever the Doctor landed, the perception filter allows the TARDIS to seemingly blend in. I mean, people may look at it and think it looks a little bit out of place, but they don't question it much. Sutekh used this ability to implant a Susan Twist woman, on every planet that the Doctor travelled to. And gradually over time, this person gained more and more importance when they landed, until eventually she gained enough power to become the woman Susan Triad, who Sutekh engineered to be the perfect trap for the Doctor. Because it's a woman, her name is Susan, and her initials can spell out the word TARDIS. He wouldn't be able to resist. And thus, now with every planet that the TARDIS has landed on, this woman's there, and now every planet has a member of Sutekh's kind of cult. And he uses this to effectively send out the death cloud right across the universe. So every planet the Doctor's landed on, its population are now being turned to dust. Even though Mel tries to tell him, but there's thousands of other planets you haven't visited yet. It's like, Yeah, but I've visited thousands, maybe even millions, and all those planets now being wiped out. This is my fault. To which I do feel for the Doctor in this particular story. I mean, how can you not? He's looking at all these places he's been to, turned to dust. Even Skaro. And if you remember back to Tom Baker's era with Genesis of the Daleks, Tom Baker's Doctor mentions how a lot of other worlds will give alliances because of the Daleks, and now just to have even Skaro wiped out in an instant, that's really sad to see. They ultimately find Doctor ultimately finds his way to a planet where he encounters a kind woman played by Sian Clifford, who mentions about her child and her child dying, and he gets a spoon from her and like, which is it's nice to see. I will admit, I got wrapped up with everybody else. Kind of, I thought, is this woman going to be revealed to be Ruby's mother? But no, this was just a kind woman. But speaking of Ruby, I do also like how they incorporate elements of 73 Yards, because 73 Yards, when I first saw it through, maybe after a while I began to think, okay, this is going to be just like that one filler episode, we just need an adventure, but 73 Yards I think is kind of like Human Nature and the Family of Blood from Series 3, because Human Nature and the Family of Blood is one of those episodes that you watch at first and you think, okay, this is just your standard kind of action, mystery, adventure, but then it later contains a piece of information that becomes really critical later on. With Human Nature and the Family of Blood, it was the Fobwatch technology, which later became prevalent in Utopia and also during Flux. And here, 73 Yards actually does prove important, as they're able to pick up fragments of memories from Ruby and also discover that an interview between Roger Apgar William, played once again by Aneurin Barnard, and somebody from the BBC. The Doctor realises that's how they can find Ruby's mother, because in 2046 Roger Apgar William made DNA and blood testing mandatory for all citizens of the UK. And even though Ruby's mother had hidden herself away for so many years and managed to avoid detection, at that point in time, if she was still alive, she'd have to sign up, and thus they're able to use that to find her. But then that all comes to a great big battle, to which even Mel ends up getting taken over by Sutekh and becoming one of his followers, and that ultimately this is how they're able to defeat Sutekh. Sutekh wishes to know before he wipes out the Doctor and Ruby exactly who Ruby's mother is, as even he doesn't seem to know. To which Ruby approaches him with the answer, but then smashes it, and her and the Doctor, using technology from the memory TARDIS, are able to reboot their current TARDIS and then drag Sutekh back into the time vortex. To which we do get a kind of nice chase sequence with that, with the TARDIS flying through the time vortex and Sutekh kind of being dragged along in its wake, and that's how they manage to ultimately undo everything, with the Doctor stating that when death meets death, that creates life, and with Sutekh kind of scarring the time vortex through, that undoes his spells in the 21st century and brings everybody back to life. Once again, you got Kate Stewart back, you got Susan Triad, Rose Noble, I believe even Harriet comes back, Colonel Christopher Abraham, Maurice Gibbons, Carlo and Cherry Sunday, and even Mrs. Flood. Just everybody's back now, but the Doctor does have to accept that Sutekh has, in a sense, won, because, well, he has to essentially kill Sutekh. Sutekh knows the Doctor doesn't like to kill people and would rather do so, but the Doctor admits he's turned him into this. He has to do this. And so ultimately sends Sutekh kind of back into the time vortex, where he seemingly turns to dust himself. Although I was watching this with a family member and we looked at each other and was like, yeah, he'll be back. I mean, that's ultimately a possibility. I mean, with the Zygons, we didn't see them for 38 years between Terror of the Zygons and the Day of the Doctor. And then afterwards, they brought back the Zygons a couple of times in Doctor Who. So when I saw Sutekh turned to dust, I was like, yeah, well, we didn't actually see him die per se. Yeah, he'll be back. He could be back at some point. I hope he comes back. But anyway, everything is set to normal, and even Susan Triad, who admits she's this woman who still is a bit of a mystery, but Kate does end up saying that possibly they could use somebody like her around here. It's like, I'm sure I could find something to do. I mean, I could make the tea. Yeah, so which I did find it a little funny when Colonel Christopher Abraham, played by Alexander Deviant, turned over and said, do you make this tea? Like, I did. Like, don't make the tea. Which, I don't know, I find that funny. But then we come to the big thing that I know is going to divide a lot of Doctor Who fans. Like, there are some people who are going to think who are going to like this, and some people who are going to not be that keen on it. But UNIT finally manages to bring up Ruby's DNA files, and they've managed to find her mother. And this woman who people have been kind of talking amongst each other about, who could this woman be? Speculation. Plus, is she a daughter of the trickster? They're like, and it's ultimately revealed that this woman is completely human. Because it turns out Ruby's mother is a nurse, now a 35-year-old nurse, named Louise Miller, played by Faye McKeever. And when she gave birth to Ruby 20 years ago, she was 15. She and her boyfriend was 15, and she didn't have the best home life. Like, she had a particularly abusive... I can't remember if it's her father or her stepfather, but ultimately, to try and keep Ruby safe, a 15-year-old Louise Miller took Ruby to the one place she knew she'd be safe, just outside a church on Christmas Eve. And they debated about, in the previous episode, what this woman was pointing at, and they finally realised that she was pointing at a sign, street sign, saying Ruby Road. And they ultimately realised that that's the name she had chosen for her daughter. Like, Ruby had thought all these years this was just a name chosen for her by the social workers, but then to realise that her mother did actually choose her name, that ultimately comes to effect. To which Ruby is a little bit confused and disheartened and saddened, going, why was all this, why did she do this? Like, and how was Louise ultimately able to escape Sutekh? Like, how did Sutekh not know who she was? Like, why was she so important? And everyone is gonna kind of be divided on this. Like, some people are gonna like still question, like, how was she able to? How did Sutekh not know she was? But ultimately, watching this through, I was reminded of a quote from somewhere. And when I looked up this quote, I realised it was actually a Doctor Who quote from Peter Capaldi's last episode, Twice Upon a Time. Because when the first Doctor asks, what's so important about one captain? The 12th Doctor replies, everybody's important to somebody somewhere. And ultimately, I like that. Just that thought for Ruby, that this woman was so important to Ruby, so important to her memory, that she ultimately was able to save the universe. And I truly love that. And Ruby tracks down Louise as it turns out Louise is about to go travelling herself, and they do reconnect. And as someone who grew up with watching things like Tracy Beaker, there are always two ways that adoption or kind of birth parents or adopted parents can react on TV. There can be there can be arguments, there can be things of, well, she's my real mother, you only looked after me. But I do like that they end up as kind of one big kind of blended family, as Ruby and Louise go back to see Carla and Cherry, and everyone just accepts each other. That, yes, Louise was the birth mother, but Carla and Cherry ultimately raised her. I do actually think that's rather beautiful. To which we then kind of get our big goodbye for Ruby and the Doctor. As Ruby comes into the TARDIS, and while she tries to tell the Doctor that she won't be long, she's just going to have a talk with her family, possibly get some pizza, look through the photo albums, and then they'll go off travelling again. but the Doctor realizes that Ruby is at a completely different point in her life, and maybe she needs to step away just for a little while. To which we can see it does hurt him, but to me, this kind of feels like a mixture of two companion goodbyes. This feels like Martha's goodbye at the end of Last of the Time Lords, to which I did actually compare this in my head to that episode as well, because I do like episodes, kind of finale episodes, where the villain does partially win for a large portion of the time, but anyway. Kind of felt like a mixture of Martha's goodbye at the end of Last of the Time Lords, where she went, I'll see you again, this isn't goodbye, and also Clara's goodbye to the 12th Doctor at the end of Death in Heaven, to which when they're just going to talk through their feelings with each other, and she does end up staying on for one more series, because I knew at this point that Millie Gibson's due to come back. Like, there was this big thing for a while of whether she was going to be replaced with a new companion for the next series, which a new companion is joining, to which I've forgotten the name of it off the top of my head at the moment. But then it was revealed that Millie Gibson was sticking around and there were going to be a group of 3 inside the TARDIS, which, yeah. But Ruby and the Doctor realise that they're at different points right now. For the time being, the Doctor needs to go off travelling and Ruby needs to stay around with her parents for a while, to which you do get that moment, and it is sad, but we do know that they'll see each other again. But then comes the big mystery. Like, the one loose end still tying up. As the episode draws to its conclusion, we once again see Mrs. Flood, played by Anita Dobson. And she kind of narrates over how this is kind of the end of the story for Ruby Sunday, and it's a very much happy ending. She says, well, what of our Time Lord the Doctor? I'm afraid we see her standing on top of the roof, seemingly dressed in a fur coat with an umbrella, as she narrates, and then says, I'm afraid the Doctor's story will only end in terror. Good night. Just like, who are you? Like, what's going on? Who are you? To which there are still theories poking around. I mean, is she the Rani? Is she a new villain? Is she a villain at all? Is she somebody kind of overlooking the Doctor? What's going on with her? Well, we'll have to wait to see that until either Christmas or possibly series 15 or season 2, whichever you want to say. But there we go. There's my quick little review of Empire of Death, and honestly, I feel this was a strong one to end off the series on. Now, I'll possibly later today try and do a review kind of ranking each episode of series 14 for me, but for the time being, Empire of Death, I felt this was a cracking episode. What do you think of it? Let me know down below in the comments, and also, what are your thoughts on the big reveal of Ruby's mother? Let me know. Anyway, until next time, see ya.